Hello, I'm Sammy K. Powers, and today we are going to be looking at a feature of PHP that hasn't even been released yet. I want to show you the process of being able to look at features before they're even part of PHP so that you can test them before they're released to the general public. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to start at the very fantastic wiki.php.net/RFC. This is the request for comments area of PHP, and this is basically where new features of PHP get added, breaking changes, and so on. And there's lots of RFCs that are being discussed right now. And we're going to take this top one, this Typed Properties 2.0. Now, this RFC was originally proposed back in the day, back in 2016 by Joe Watkins and Phil Sturgeon. It was slated for PHP 7.1, but was declined, unfortunately, because of I believe it was because of some issues with the implementation. Those things, for the most part, have been fixed. Nikita Pavlov and Bob Wynand have spent a lot of their time getting the Typed Properties RFC up to snuff, and it is long, very detailed, very in-depth. Look at this thing. It'll take a while to read that, but it's a really cool feature, so we should totally check it out. So what is it? Let's look at the intro. The intro is the best kind of place to figure out what these RFCs are all about. And it basically shows a typical setup where you have user with ID name, and you use these doc blocks to define what specific type they are with the scalar type declarations that we got, and PHP 7.0 and was expanded in each version after that. And the proposal is to add type declarations right here on the property themselves without using doc blocks, which is really cool, and have PHP actually enforce these types. So let's take this example and actually put it into a PHP script. Basically, we have a user class here with ID and name properties. We are using doc blocks to show that ID is an int and name is a string. We use a constructor to put the ID and name inside of our class when we instantiate the object. And we have an extra little method here to dump, or we're going to var dump both of these properties, ID and name. And here at the bottom, we actually run this code. We instantiate a user with ID 42, the answer to the universe, and my name, Sammy K. Powers. And then we dump the info. So let's go ahead and run this with PHP. I have PHP installed on this MacBook, version 7.1, so a little bit out of date, but not too bad. Let's just run the script we just looked at, which I believe is right there. There we go. As we would expect, we get a var dump of int42 and string Sammy K. Powers. So this works perfectly as you would expect in PHP. But if we were to remove these doc blocks and put the type declarations actually on the properties themselves, we're going to get a different story. If we try to run this with PHP again, let's give that a shot. Oops, parse error. So this is not valid PHP syntax. So how do we test this RFC? Well, if we go back to the RFC, you'll see that there's a link to the implementation right here. When you click on it, it'll take you to GitHub, and you can see the pull request that was submitted by Nikita Pavlov with lots of happy responses from the developer community. But you'll see that this pull request is still open. It hasn't been merged to any of the branches yet. So how do we test this pull request? Well, there's a way we can do this by cloning the PHP source repo. And if you haven't done this already, I have a video of compiling PHP from source that should be appearing in a little notification in the upper right-hand corner of this video saying, click me if you haven't done this already. So check that video out. It'll take you from start to finish from cloning the repo and compiling from PHP from the source code. I just want to show you how I have my remote set up for the PHP source repo. I've got origin pointed to my fork on GitHub, and upstream is what I've called the original source repo at php/php-source. And if we do git status, you'll see we have a clean up to date with origin master, and we are on the master branch. So I'm actually going to create a new branch and basically pull in the pull request into that branch. If we go back to the pull request, we need to make note of the ID, which is 3313. So how do we do this? We do git fetch upstream, so we're pointed at the original source repo, and now we need to reference the pull request. And the way you do that is pull/the pull request ID, which is 3313, and point it to the head. And now we need to create a branch name that we want to pull this into, so we're just going to be really creative and call it RFC Typed Properties. And that's going to pull in the pull request from GitHub and create a branch called RFC Typed Properties. Now we just need to check out the branch. And now we should be able to do git log, and we see Bob's commit here, the latest commit, which is what we see if we scroll all the way to the bottom. That's it right here. We have all the latest commits for this PR, and we are ready to rock and roll. So now that we have the PR pulled in, all we have to do now is compile PHP from source. And again, if you haven't done this already, check out that other video I referenced to earlier. I have a cheat script or bash script that I like to run, and I keep it just outside of the PHP source. I call it config, and it does a make disk clean and VCS clean, so it just removes all the files that are temporary files that are made. It does build comp, so it builds configure script with autoconf. Then we run configure with all my favorite things I like to run configure with. And at the very end, I have this fancy little, I don't know what you call it, symbol that allows me to append flags if I wanted to, for example, run it with GD. So I could do with GD, and it will actually run configure with the with GD flag. So right now we're just going to do it straight up config. And while we're at it, I'm going to go ahead and make with jobs set to 4 because I have 4 cores, and so make go faster. Make go faster, give it more jobs, go. And with the magic of video editing, we're done with this step in about 2 seconds, but hopefully yours didn't take too much longer. It takes a little bit longer, especially if you're trying to resolve dependencies. It can take a long time. So thanks for bearing with it and getting to this step. But now we should be able to see the compiled PHP version that we have, which lies at sappy/cli/php. And if we do -- version, we can see that we are running on the master branch, which is set to, at the time of recording, PHP 7.3-dev. And we have thread safety and debugging enabled, all that fun stuff. Now, let's review very quickly the PHP script that we were wanting to run. As you remember, we have these 2 properties here that have been declared. They've been strict typed. They've been typed as int and string. So what happens if we run this with our new compiled version of PHP? Let's give it a shot. There's no errors. What? Now, if you remember, when we ran this as normal PHP, it gave us parse errors. So we know that our compiled version of PHP is working because it runs our script perfectly. So why don't we kind of play with this feature just a little bit before we get into really testing it and seeing how it works in the real world. So here we are back in the PHP script with our contrived example of a user class and our typed properties with an int and a string. Say we wanted to have another property here. I'm going to just give us a little space. So I'm going to add another property here called date, and it is supposed to be an instance of datetime. So if we were to run this from our compiled PHP, it works just fine because we don't actually ever use this property. But what happens if we try to use this property before we've done anything with it? We've just sort of declared it up here. We haven't set a value or anything. So let's just dump it out here with the rest of everything. And then run it and see what happens. Fatal error. Typed property user date must not be accessed before initialization. What? This is a new error in PHP. There's now a new state of variables that exist where you can have a variable that's declared as a particular type but isn't instantiated yet or initialized. If we were to remove this typing from it and run it again, this time it just returns null. Now, this often manifests itself as a bug in PHP. Oftentimes, we'll define a property when we're first setting up the class and we're ready to use it, and then we forget to set it, and we end up doing something with it later on in some method, and then we run the script. PHP will run it just fine. It just returns null for that particular property, but it doesn't give us any errors. Now, type properties also support nullable types. So if we add this question mark beforehand, then datetime doesn't have to be an instance of datetime. It could be datetime or null. So what happens if we were just to run this, and once again, we get the same error message, must not be accessed before initialization. This is because we never set the date property to any specific value. In fact, what I have to do is explicitly set it to null. Now, if we were to run the script, we get null, very similar to the behavior before adding the type declaration. So this and this generate the same result, but this is much more explicit. So hopefully a couple of light bulbs are going off in your head thinking of where you can apply typed properties in your own scripts. But since this is a brand new feature, it's still under a lot of development. Lots of commits are happening, fixing bugs here and there. In fact, when I was playing with it the other day, I found a little bit of a bug where the error message was not really returning what was expected. So I posted it here, and Nikita Pavlov fixed it right away. So if you want to join the bandwagon of testing this and other features of PHP before they're released, let's see how we can test it in a real-world application. And the way that I like to do this is actually start to implement it on a project that already has unit tests, which is the kind of the fastest, most automated way that I feel like I can test this particular feature. So since I've been a maintainer of the PHP SDK for the Facebook Graph API for a long time, I'm very familiar with the code base, and it does have its own unit tests. So here I've got a clone of the PHP Graph SDK from Facebook, and if I were to run PHP unit, I'm going to add the -v to add a little bit of verbosity so we can see a little bit of the extra output here. We can see that we're using the PHP 7.1 runtime to run these tests, and they all pass. Some of them were skipped because I don't have mcrypt installed, because mcrypt is a deprecated and completely removed extension, but they do pass. But if you scroll back to the top here, you'll notice that the runtime is still PHP 7.1. How do we run PHP unit with our compiled version of PHP? Well, all we have to do is actually prefix this command with the path to our compiled binary. So I could sit here and go path to SAPI, CLI, PHP, vendor, bin, PHP unit, all that kind of stuff. But that's just too much typing for me. I've actually set up an alias. In my bash profile, right here on this third line, cphp is my alias that points to the compiled binary always on my computer. So if I type cphp and do -- version, you'll see that we have PHP 7.3, which is the one we just compiled. Now, let's try running the unit test with PHP 7.3 or the compiled version that we just had. So cphp, and we'll add the -v for verbosity. And now you can see the runtime is happening with PHP 7.3. Now, interestingly enough, the tests haven't even completed and there's already an error. Oh my goodness. So this repo is not compatible with the next version of PHP. What failed? Okay, so it looks like we actually have errors that are related to PHP 7.2. We really need to get this thing up to snuff. But these countable things are issues related to PHP 7.2. We need to get these fixed first. So it looks like it's complaining about Facebook batch request.php line 225. So let's bring that up. Here we go, 225. It is trying to count requests, which is a very typical pattern that keeps appearing in open source projects where the requests property is not initialized with an array. So we try to count null and it's not countable, so it returns that error message. What was the other error message? We can just fix this by setting this to an array, initializing it with array. What was the other one? Facebook test. Facebook test. Oh, you know what? I bet this is related to the same issue. Let's just run the tests again. Oh, good. Now they all pass with our skipped tests, which we don't care about. So now we can see with our runtime of PHP 7.3-dev, our unit tests for this library work perfectly. So how do we actually test the typed properties feature? What I've been doing is going through the classes, all the classes in the project, and just adding types to the properties. So we can skip all these constants. Those don't count. So anywhere there's a doc block, you can basically just copy paste right down there. Here we go. Copy paste, copy paste. Now here's where we have an or null. We don't have union types in PHP, so this is not valid even with the new type property syntax. But we do have nullables, which is sort of like a pseudo union type, and we just add the question mark there and this suddenly becomes nullable. Same thing for this one. That's a really freaking long variable name and interface name. Nullable access token, nullable string, nullable all the things. Now here we have a union type that expects Facebook response or Facebook batch response. Now in this particular situation, if these weren't extended from each other or they were completely separate classes, we would just leave this blank because again, we don't support union types in PHP, unfortunately. But I believe, if I remember correctly, Facebook batch response actually extends from Facebook response. So if we do this, we should be good. And it's nullable, so we need to add a little question mark here. Now, we just added types to all these properties in the Facebook class. This is sort of the main service class for the PHP SDK for the Graph API in Facebook. Let's get risky. I'm actually, since these tests are taking so long to execute, I'm going to add this flag exclude group integration, because there's a couple tests in the Facebook PHP SDK that are actually hitting the Graph API live, which is which is very something that I've been trying to get out of the test since day one. But they're very adamant about keeping live hits to the API in the unit test. But it's they're Facebook, they do whatever they want. So let's run these and see if we broke anything. Oh, we broke all the things. Why did we break? Let's scroll up and see the errors. So now we're starting to see this error message that we saw earlier, that we're trying to access a variable before it's initialized. So this happens with the OAuth2 client. Looks like OAuth2 client, OAuth2 client. It's happening a lot here with this OAuth2 client property. Okay, it's actually just all related to that. So if you remember earlier where we had our datetime object, where we had our datetime property and we made it nullable, but we didn't actually set it to null, we got this error. So I'm actually going to find that one that it's complaining about, OAuth2 client. And interestingly enough, the doc blocks didn't have or null here. So the doc blocks were actually wrong. This needs to be nullable like that. And on top of being nullable, it also needs to be initialized with null. Let's run the tests again. And this time they run without any errors. Perfect. So now we have an entire class in a real live project with typed properties that runs all the unit tests and passes. That's really cool. Now we can keep going and go to another one of these classes, like the Facebook app class, and copy paste all these doc blocks and into actual typed properties. And then running all the unit tests again, rinse and repeat. And this time we didn't have any errors. So adding this feature to this particular class didn't have any problems whatsoever. Let's look at one more example in this particular project where we have this MIME types class that has a giant array of hard-coded MIME types in it. It was stolen from Gozel, I believe. So let's see, we are expecting this protected static instance to be an instance of self. So we could just reference self here. And this is supposed to be an array. So we can strictly type array to this property. And let's run our unit test and see if we broke anything. Whoa, errors galore. Oh, all we did was change two little things and it's going crazy. Now, if you notice here, we're getting that error instance must not be accessed before initialization, which means this is being accessed before it's initialized, which means it needs to be nullable and we need to set it to null. We don't always have to set it to null if we're actually setting it to some value before it's nullable, but we're trying to access it before it's been set to any value at all. So we actually need to set that value here. Let's give this another shot. Wow, all the tests pass. We went from an insane amount of errors to just all the tests passing with that one little trick. I've noticed that the error that I keep running into over and over when I'm testing this on real life projects is that when you have a nullable type and you don't actually initialize it with a value of null, then it throws some problems at you because we're used to accessing variables in PHP before we've actually set them to any particular value. So I hope this has been fun for you. I hope you've been able to get this feature rocking and testing in your real live project. If you have any code base at all that has unit tests, go ahead and just go find some classes, add some types to the properties, run the PHP unit tests or whatever kind of test you've got, and see if you can get any errors. If you get errors, see if they're pretty easy to fix errors like what we've been trying to do here. And if you find a bug, post on the PR and be a part of the conversation. Contribute back to PHP internals. If you've been wanting to get involved, this is a great way to do it. And people will remember you. They'll be like, I remember you. You were that person who submitted all this information and feedback on this particular PR, and it was very helpful. So thank you for all that feedback. You might not even know C, but that's okay. We're in there and we're getting involved and we're testing things. So good luck with this. I'm Sammy K. Powers. Talk to you next time.